Well, moving on to the NHS, and no matter what is planned for the NHS, it seems you're never far away from campaigners fighting to prevent it from being privatised, from TV programmes about how it's faring. Did you see tonight on ITV last night, for example, which was looking at A&E departments? Well, recently we reported on a massive shake-up of GP services in the south, with smaller practices facing the threat of closure in favour of large, purpose-built medical hubs or super centres. Well, there's a day of action and protest about keeping the NHS public in Poole tomorrow. Joining us now is Damien Stone, who's on the steering committee of the Dorset branch of the campaign group Keep Our NHS Public. Good morning, Damien.
Good morning.
Thanks for being there this morning. So what are your main concerns?
Well, people are starting to realise that some of their local NHS services in Dorset are under threat. I mean, it's said that Alderney, St Leonard's and Weymouth hospitals will probably close, and the ones in Portland, Wareham and Shaftesbury are under threat. And everyone knows around here that Poole A&E may well be downsized. Now, these may seem like sort of little local issues, but what the public need to know is that this is part of a massive cut in NHS expenditure. So this is not a local issue. This is going on all over England at the moment.
Well,
and by 2020, the local commissioning groups need to find cuts of £22 billion, and nobody has asked for these cuts. Nobody wants them. Nobody voted for them, and it's a massive threat to the future of the NHS.
And I mentioned that programme on ITV last night because they were looking at an A&E department that was closed due to lack of staff, it would appear, rather than money. I wonder what your thoughts are about that. How much of this is money? How much of it is having enough people trained up to run the place?
Well, I mean, given the scenario you've just mentioned there, why would we then be looking to cut the NHS spending by £22 billion over the next 5 years? It's interesting to point out that this is only happening in England. This is a political decision to do this. It's not happening in NHS Scotland. It's not happening in NHS Wales. This is purely a political decision, and, you know, that's why we're against it, because at the end of the day, these are unnecessary cuts at a time when the population is growing and it's also ageing.
Theresa May would say, and in fact she did in her conference speech, and I think it came up in PMQs on Wednesday, is saying that, you know, the biggest increase in privatisation in the NHS was during the Labour government, the last 13 years of the Labour government. What do you say to that?
Well, I would agree with that. I don't think the last Labour government under New Labour was a left-wing party. I think it was very much in the centre, and they did try to bring in privatisation into the NHS. They started the ball rolling there. They brought in student loans. I am very glad that Jeremy Corbyn is now the leader of the Labour Party. I know people may not like him, but I like his policies, and he has pledged to defend the NHS and to stop creeping privatisation.
Everyone pledges to do something about the NHS. As I mentioned, Theresa May, it came up as a theme in her speech. The next thing will be the autumn statement. What's your message to the Chancellor, the new Chancellor, about funding for the NHS? Well,
I'm glad you mentioned Theresa May. She has just given the green light to spending money on Hinkley Point. We recently had a vote where they voted through Trident, which is going to cost billions of pounds. They found money to bail out the banks. They always find the money to invade a foreign country. So are they really saying that they can't find the money for the NHS? This is a political decision. And if you look at what is one of the best things about this country, it is the NHS. Nobody would disagree with that. And as I say, this is not happening in Scotland, it's not happening in Wales. This is a political decision by Jeremy Hunt, and he's the man who co-authored a book a few years ago talking about privatising.
Damien, I didn't ask you that. I've asked you, are you going to encourage the Chancellor to put more money in the autumn statement?
Absolutely. That's as I say, if they found the money for Hinkley Point and they found the money for Trident, they can certainly find the money for the NHS, an institution that everybody in this country loves.
Damien, thank you for your time. Good to have you there. Damien Stone this morning, and the march taking place in Poole Park tomorrow at midday, with a march to Ashley Cross for speeches at 2:30. It's coming up to 7:45.